just so you all are aware. So welcome to tonight's workshop. Again, my name is Linda Lukasik. I'm the Executive Director of Environment Hamilton, and I'm joined tonight by Michelle Tom and Nancy Hurst from Stop Sprawl Hamont. And the three of us are going to be presenting this workshop tonight. We're really pleased to have so many of you here tonight interested in learning more about the issue and learning how to delegate. I want to start with a very brief land acknowledgement. The city of Hamilton is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Treaty, and it's a treaty between the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas, and the Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. And subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. So I think that's a really important note to start on tonight as we talk about the land around us and respect for that land and use of that land. Nancy, if you could, next slide, please. So just some rules around the workshop tonight. We're asking people to use the chat function. Feel free to use it to share your views or to pose questions during the workshop presentation. We will be doing a full Q&A. We say here at the end of the session, but we are going to pause partway through as well to give you an opportunity after Michelle has presented some information to either write your question in the chat or raise your hand and unmute yourself. We'll offer and accommodate both ways. We are, as you all know already, the session is being recorded tonight, and we will share a link to the recording after the workshop, and we'll also share the slide deck that we're using tonight. And then finally, everyone who's registered for the workshop will receive an action sheet, and we'll send that to you by email. We'll try to get it to you as soon as we can after the session tonight. And it's going to include all the key information that you need for getting yourself set up and registered to delegate. So we're telling you that now so that you don't have to worry about madly writing everything down. We'll send that action sheet with links to all of the information that you need and a whole lot of other information as well to get you more engaged in the issue. Next. All right, so I'm starting tonight with just a very brief Stop Sprawl 101 history. Just to help you to understand where we're at with this issue. So I just want to set the stage and share with you that Environment Hamilton has been closely following urban growth management in the municipality for a long time. And we've had longstanding concerns about the city's interest in expanding urban Hamilton into rural Elfrida. And you can see Elfrida on the map here. And this is a concern that has led us to call for the city to freeze the urban boundary, to hold it firm, and instead figure out how to accommodate urban growth within the urban boundary in order to preserve prime agricultural land and rural natural areas. And so when you look at this map, the more deep the green color, the primer or the better the quality of farmland. So this is a lot of prime class 1, 2, and 3 farmland in Elfrida, and it's a precious land in our country, not just in Ontario. And so we're really pushing for accommodation of urban growth within our existing urban boundary to facilitate the creation of more complete and climate resilient urban neighborhoods. So it makes a whole lot of sense. And I just want to make you aware that there are resources and people out there to get you up to speed on this issue in more detail. If you need those details, you'll get some of that in the action sheet. And I'm going to speak on Michelle and Nancy's behalf as well by saying that the three of us are always happy to talk about this issue. And so we'll share contact information in that action sheet too, so you can reach out to any of us to talk about all of this stuff. So I just want to say the city of Hamilton's interest in expanding out has gone back as far as 2006 when it comes to Elfrida. And that's when the Council of the Day set direction to identify this as their preferred area to grow into. And so city planners have been given this direction and have been following this direction from council since then. Councils obviously have changed since that time. You know, that was 15 plus years ago now. So it's important to note that the city has never formally expanded the urban boundary. And this is important for you to understand if you're not familiar with the intricacies of planning. Land within the urban boundary is open to the possibility of development, whereas land outside of that defined urban boundary, rural land, is not land that a developer can, in the here and now, start to build a subdivision on. They have to get the approval for that urban boundary expansion. And that's a key step in potential outward sprawl expansion. So Elfrida's not there yet. It's sitting on the outside, as the other land is that we'll talk about today. And so this is a good thing, really, sitting where we're sitting now, 15 years later, because a lot has changed in the world. We're now facing an even greater threat, an existential threat from the climate crisis. And I think we have a much better understanding of how to build climate resilient cities, and we need to be running with that. So I just want to point out that around the same time that the city council in 2006 identified this desire to expand out, the former provincial Liberal government was bringing into place the Places to Grow Act and the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, along with the Greenbelt Acting Plan. So there were active measures in place at the provincial level to protect farmland, to curb sprawl, to take us in a new direction. Next. Well, things have changed since then. So I am going to very briefly highlight some of the key and problematic policy changes that our current provincial government has brought into place. And there are 4 key changes that are a big concern as far as, smarter urban growth and smarter urban growth management. And I think it's fair to say that this provincial government has taken us backwards on that front. They're dragging us back to a sort of 1950s approach to urban growth management, which is really what got us into the mess we're in the first place. So the first bullet there refers to the potential for private urban boundary expansions. I'm not going to get into the details, but know that private landowners can pitch these kinds of expansions to a municipality. The good thing is a municipality can deny them, so municipalities are empowered to do that. The other 3 pieces that are listed here are really important. The first one, urban intensification and density targets have been lowered by this provincial government. So in other words, the Ford government has changed the planning rules so that more sprawling development is allowed. The bar has been lowered, where with the previous government, we were heading in a direction of a phasing in of more ambitious, more aggressive targets to facilitate more infill development in urban areas, the building of more complete urban neighborhoods or urban communities. So currently Hamilton is required to accommodate a minimum of 50% of all new residential units within what's called the built-up urban areas, and 50 jobs and people per hectare in designated greenfield areas. So that's land within the urban boundary that hasn't been developed yet. And it would include any land like the Elfrida lands should the city bring them into the urban area. But regardless of the backward move by the Ford government, it's really essential for everyone to understand that those targets are minimums, and municipalities have the power to set those targets higher, to set more aspirational, more ambitious goals in terms of accommodating growth within the urban boundary. And that's what's led us to say pursuing a firm urban boundary is a viable thing for us to be talking about. The provincial government also expanded what's called the planning horizon out to the year 2051. So that means that the horizon spans over 30 years. And the way the planning horizon works is that the provincial government projects population and job growth for each municipality. And the municipality is then obligated through the growth plan to accommodate that level of growth. And normally it would be, a maximum of a 20-year planning horizon. So 30 years out is a long time. And we know that those projections are often way off the mark. They're often way higher than they should be. So there's a great deal of concern about such a long planning horizon and the fact that the Ford government is pushing this. There are many of us who've categorized this as a land grab, and we're saying that a very long planning horizon and that forced requirement for municipalities to plan for population growth over such a long period of time is only going to force that movement in the direction of urban expansion. But we will say to you, and we'll share this perspective tonight, that even with those population projections that this provincial government has made, we strongly believe that we can be shifting in a direction where we accommodate that growth within our urban boundary if we do the right thing. So the final piece here is that the provincial government, under this provincial government, they've modified what's called the land needs assessment methodology, and they've reinstated market demand as a driving force versus the previous methodology, which had been amended to really focus on density and intensification targets, and targets that were being ramped up to become tighter and tighter, higher targets over time. Next slide. I'm going to talk a little bit more about land needs assessment. So this is just a definition of what the land needs assessment is, just in case you haven't seen that term before. It's exactly what the name would imply. It's a technical study that determines how much land is needed in the city to accommodate growth. And again, it must be completed based on the methodology developed by the province and is required as part of a larger process that municipalities have to go through called a municipal comprehensive review. So again, the land needs piece, that shift to market demand is a really problematic one. And just want to point out that market demand can be a very subjective thing. Within the context of the city's land needs assessment process, we need to be asking questions about how market demand is being defined. What are the assumptions around the influence of demographic shifts? Is the city looking forward or relying on past market trends? Projecting market demand for housing types 30 years into the future is not easy to do, just like it's not easy to project population and job numbers that far into the future. And I would just add, layering the climate crisis on top of it all, it's likely that more people into the future are going to want to live in higher density, complete climate resilient communities over the next decade. So there's a whole lot happening here that's cause for concern. Next slide, please. So just to fast forward us into the future, the draft land needs assessment that we've been talking about was presented to the General Issues Committee for the first time in December of 2020. And at that point, we knew that city staff were recommending what they labeled the ambitious density scenario. You'll see on a map what lands that would consume, but it essentially involves 3,300 acres of prime farmland being gobbled up by urban sprawl. So what you see on the slide here, hopefully, is something that most of you recognize. It's a portion of the household survey that was sent out on this topic. And it's the three options that were put before all of us as Hamiltonians. And I just want to help you all to understand that between January and now, and some of you will know this, we've mobilized a whole lot of people on this issue. So that draft land needs assessment was presented in December. By March 29th of this year, we had, I think, 150 people preparing written delegations and 55 plus people doing oral delegations at a meeting. It was at that meeting that you can be sure, as a result of community advocacy, we had councillors passing a motion to have this household survey be sent out to every household in the municipality to ask all of us, what option do you want to see for our community? Includes the ambitious density option. We all pushed for a no boundary expansion option to be included. And then there was the choice for people to share any other ideas they had. And this chart, the summary chart, tells the story. Huge response, 90% plus. Hamiltonians who responded to the survey told our elected representatives that we want to see option 2, no boundary expansion. So that's incredibly significant. And I just want to add to and acknowledge, with Nancy and Michelle on the call, that Stop Sprawl Hamilton has done some incredible work to mobilize community on this issue. And many of you will have used the online tool that enabled you, especially if you didn't get a copy of the household survey in the mail, to be able to make your views known on this important issue. Next slide. And this is just a map that we like to share to remind everyone of what's at stake. So you can see the labeled lands, and pretty much all of these properties would likely be consumed should the ambitious density option be approved. And we know that these lands include prime farmland. In fact, it's all prime farmland. So we're incredibly concerned about this shift, or the possibility of this shift. So I'm now going to hand it off to Michelle, who's going to walk you through the next section of the workshop. Thanks.
You're muted, Michelle.
Sorry. Good evening, everyone. I want to say that Nancy and I had our first delegations this past year, and we've done 3 or 4 since then. So we're not experts by any stretch, but we've had some interesting experiences and feel that the real power is around delegation. Letters are wonderful, phone calls are great, but delegations have the real power. Narratives are powerful in those delegations, stories. Your perspective is important. The city staff may give reports, but you provide the lived experience and the views of yourself, your family, and your neighbors when you delegate. I think if we can speak in plain language and communicate our strong feelings on this topic, we can really impact counselors. And I like this idea of connecting to the hearts, because we know with the human brain that we listen with our heads, but our hearts can really tug us to make the right choice. And many of us have spoken about the impact for our children if we don't make this choice. Thank you, Nancy. Next slide. So what should you expect? Well, you're going to be on a WebEx platform, and they are very helpful in assisting you if you're a live delegate. And Nancy will explain both live delegations and pre-recorded. I think it's really important to emphasize to really practice trying to be less than 5 minutes in your content. You really don't want to sound rushed. And if you go over, you may be cut off or interrupted in your concluding words. And it kind of is unsettling when you're building momentum towards that ending. It might be a nice idea to set your phone to stopwatch and prop it up where you can see it. Of course, it would be on mute. It's really important if you're live to be on mute. And that gives you an awareness of the time. And if you've practiced with that stopwatch, you might find that you can do that quite readily. I'd say that short pauses can be powerful, and they often can help us to avoid using so those pauses are helpful. If you are asked a question by a counselor at the end, don't feel compelled that you must be an expert. I mean, as someone who's been working on this for quite some time, there's a lot more information that Linda knows that I don't. She has a PhD in land use planning. I certainly don't. And if you are asked a question that you don't know the answer to, admit it. And the council's not expecting you as a citizen to be an expert. Next slide, please. So we've been told that counselors like positive energy, and we really have momentum at our backs, as Linda pointed out, with 3% engagement of our population in this issue on our side. Starting with a smile is helpful. These delegations are long. When you mention your ward counselor by name, they take a special notice of your delegation. And another quick tip, which I just learned recently, is that if your laptop or your computer can face a window during the daylight hours, you won't have shadows on your face. And obviously quiet backgrounds are important. So yeah, thank you. Next slide. So our friend Matthew Higginson created this montage of Yuki Hayashi's delegation from March 29th. I'd like you to listen to her delegation for a taste of one person's perspective. Thanks, Nancy, for loading it.
The past year has been a year of unprecedented upheaval. Let's not ram through a policy that affects citizens, businesses, communities, and the environment without complete input from all stakeholders. We need more time. Hamilton is geographically blessed. We can use our natural resources strategically, preserving their integrity and wealth for generations to come, as carbon sinks, as watersheds, as wildlife habitat, as the fertile agricultural land we need to preserve local food security and support family farms, as recreational lands where we can fish with our kids, walk with our dogs, or go on a 5-hour-long bike ride while training for an Ironman triathlon or a century bike race. I'm sure you can guess how I feel about the need to contain sprawl and develop the urban core. I've lived downtown my entire life, and I'm also an avid traveler. And my experience has been that in the developed world, high and medium density urban cores promote economic development, small business growth, public safety, especially for women walking or jogging alone at night, and just generally pleasant, walkable cities rich in cafes, shops, restaurants, bookstores, barbershops, salons, gyms. these densely populated communities also foster neighborhood resources, from, say, community gardens to that nonprofit where your teenager earns their volunteer hours, or that subsidized mid-rise building where survivors of spousal abuse can restart their lives. We still have room to grow inside the city proper. We have not run out of space. We do not have to pave over world-class farmland to put in resource gobbling single-family home subdivisions. I love the core, but this isn't just about me. This is about the thousands of Hamilton residents who have their own opinions on land use, who didn't know about today's session, who couldn't attend even virtually, who haven't yet shared their views. Please let them be heard too. And let's try to do better. Let's commit to finding more ways of promoting citizen participation.
Next slide, please. Thanks, Nancy. So let's talk about delegation topics. I want to say a few words, then open up the floor to some discussion for about 10 minutes. And then Nancy will speak about the nuts and bolts of submitting oral and recorded delegations. And then we can do question and answers. So of course, option 2 is our goal. We've heard conversations in staff reports and even on Twitter that there's talk of maybe some kind of phased in solution in 10 years or later. And that's not something we're willing to compromise on. We've got the same problem if we wait. We do have enough land to grow within our urban boundary. It's just a matter of where. We don't want it on farmland. We want it within the current urban boundary. And we can do that. And we can follow provincial guidelines according to our legal advisor at Environmental Defense. We want to save farmland forever. I think everybody on this call does. And it's very costly, and that's a key discussion item. I would say as well, the staff have failed really to factor in their new reports, new homes within the urban boundary. We don't need an expansion. If they are admitting that land will be needed at any time prior to 2051, even if it's at 2041, that would require all land to be brought in next July 2022, which is the land grab Linda's talking about. What the staff is proposing with this balanced approach or phasing in approach, it's still option 1. With small changes, they acknowledge even themselves are very trivial. I think they've moved it from 3,300 acres down by about 200 acres to 3,200, 3,100 or 3,200. We should still reject this latest proposal. Staff have really failed to address any of the fatal flaws of option 1, which we see many of. And they've done nothing to address that we can build singles and semi-detached homes within the urban boundary and in designated green fields. Now, I noticed Caroline has a comment here. I'm wondering, Caroline, do you want to expand on that? And you could unmute yourself and speak to that as a possible delegation topic.
Hi, Michelle. Yes, I just saw this post by Jennifer Casemat on Twitter. She
Okay.
referenced the article in the Star today. The newly appointed Minister of Housing by the Trudeau government has just made an announcement, or is about to make an announcement, requiring municipalities to increase densification in urban cores, and so they can be eligible for funding for low-income housing. And so she's, like, Jennifer's really quite happy about this because it kind of counters the NIMBYism aspect of, people in neighborhoods saying we don't want densification. And I think it really helps the movement, because if municipalities can stay the course and say we don't want urban boundary expansion, there's pressure from the federal government at the other end, it really will mean that our actions won't be for naught. And I think it's a positive sign.
Thank you, Caroline. That's really
You're
interesting.
welcome.
Yeah, that's great. Did Linda or Nancy want to comment on that further? Linda?
Yeah, just very quickly. Yeah, Carolyn, thanks for sharing that. And I think it's really exciting that we're starting to see other levels of government tie funding towards requirements that are going to help to promote the emergence of climate resilient cities. And so that requirement to increase density, I think that's a positive thing. we just need to keep pushing other levels of government to attach all of the funding that they provide to municipalities to requirements that would help with building climate resilience. So thank you for sharing that. I think that's fantastic news.
Well, Linda, I think it's part of what David Crombie was saying in the environmental defense panel, because he was talking about that 2022 was going to be the best year that we were going to have with regard to keeping the Greenbelt intact. And I think he was even talking about the pressure between the two different levels of government working together to make sure the Greenbelt stays where it is. So yeah.
For sure. Yeah. Interesting times ahead, but this is a good time.
I'm excited.
I'm wondering if someone else has an idea for a delegation topic that they wouldn't mind sharing. I know, Pat, would you be willing to share what you're thinking about? You don't have to though, Pat, if you don't want to.
I'm quite happy to.
Okay.
Yes, I'm going to actually discuss where I live, although in my delegation, I'm not saying specifically that I live there, but where I live was built in the late 1980s. It's the place that Ryerson School used to be. And at the time it was built, there were other articles, both in the Globe and Mail and the Spectator, saying this is the ideal type of densification. At that time, they said high density. Of course, now it would be regarded as medium density. But it's interesting to see what you can do completely. We have masses of trees, which of course is going to become even more important now with what is going on in the globe. And we're in a walking neighborhood. We have good bus service, and that is critical, I think, to wherever we end up with urban density, so that we can stop using as many cars. And I'm actually stressing climate change in my delegation. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. That's terrific. And I see Heidi has her hand up. Heidi, would you like to unmute yourself? Thank you.
Hi, thank you. I've been a little quiet in caregiving lately, but I hold a midlife Master of Landscape Architecture from the University of Guelph and a background that includes aquatic and forest biology. And I'm currently living just adjacent to these lands in Brant County. And I have lived in Dundas and been very involved in downtown Hamilton for quite some time. I want to just speak about the word of farmland. So as you probably know, Canada has over the last few decades only had 3% of its prime farm soils or growing soils reserved as farmland. Half of it in BC, half of it here. That is obviously less than the 1.5% right now. And I just want to point out that the word farmland is really tricky. Something that's happening in Brant County is that farms are getting bought up and used for farm or land referencing businesses in order to keep their designation as farmland. I would like to suggest that we talk about soil, that we actually talk about farm soils. And I think that even municipalities like Brant or Hamilton can gain a great deal of traction by being specific about saying exactly what we mean. The word farmland can be very, very easily misappropriated and its meanings can be altered. But the word soil, to be able to retain certain qualities of soil, is something measurable and trackable that I wonder if we could bring that into the public conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi. And that's an interesting point you raise. We've been working on this issue in the Halton region as well. And we had some counselors actually give anecdotal comments that, oh, the soil's not that great in Halton. And we were lucky to have a soil expert with a PhD actually share maps and speak to that issue. And we know as well that we've got soil mappers amongst us ourselves in our group that have honed in on that issue too. And I think we always, even though we know it to be true, we have some of the best soils in Canada. We also have access to water, which is great too, right?
And a reminder that forest soils, the humus from forests, is also soil quality. We're not just talking about existing agricultural soils.
That's excellent. I'm hoping, Heidi, you are considering a delegation on that topic. you have incredible expertise and interest, and not all of us do. I certainly don't, but I hope you are thinking about that, are you?
I don't know about incredible, but absolutely I'll bring some leadership, and maybe you can guide me off screen as to what I can do now that I'm a resident of Brant instead. But yeah, I'll absolutely support what's going on. It's one Earth. No problem.
And we've had people, oh, sorry, Linda, I was just gonna say, we've had delegates from other regions speak at our presentations. Whether or not they're experts, it has an impact on them as living adjacent to our areas or even on other parts of the province. Linda would like to comment to you next.
Yeah, just very quickly, thank you, Heidi, for raising this issue. And it speaks to another policy issue that keeps looming out there. And I want to share it here just in case others have heard this. One of the things that we've come up against as we really push for Hamilton to do things differently is we've had developers, organizations, we've had municipal planners themselves tell us that if we hold the boundary firm and people look elsewhere, that we're going to generate pressure on farmland outside of Hamilton in municipalities that don't have the same protections for farmland that we have through the Greenbelt here. And one thing that I want to say is what Heidi's pointing out underscores a bigger problem in Ontario, and that is that we don't have the proper protections for farmland right across the province, and we need those. And so I would say to anyone out here who faces that sort of pushback from anyone who is saying that we're doing a bad thing by pushing for a firm boundary, we all need to be saying what needs to happen here is at the provincial level, those truly protective policies need to be put in place so that farmland, all of the good soils and all of the good farmland in Ontario is protected moving forward. And that will remove the pressures so that one municipality isn't pitted against another in the way that developers and in some instances planners are trying to frame this issue.
Thank you, Linda. Is there anyone else who would like to comment on their delegation? Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Nancy. Oh, and she will take us to the next section. Thanks, Nancy.
Well, can you hear me okay? I was actually going to say just one thing that I thought myself would be an interesting delegation or a topic is something that I'm kind of obsessed with at the moment, which is the missing middle. I'm really thinking that it's important that we show councillors how we can build within the urban boundary without the need for tall towers, because that's something that keeps coming up again and again, is especially what the home builders use against us is, well, if we don't expand the boundary, then you're going to have a 30-story tower next to your house, which is patently false. So that's one thing that I'd like to outline in my delegation is how we can build semis and garden suites and even small apartment complexes, 3 stories. We can build on top of our sprawling strip malls and our malls. All of these areas are ways that we can densify within our city. And I think, I don't know if you mentioned this, Michelle, but we're really trying to highlight the ground-oriented buildings that can be done, like semi-detached and garden suites and smaller homes, even just having a home that's not, 4,000 square feet. Do we have to build only 4,000 square feet homes anymore? Maybe we can build 1,500 square foot homes or even smaller. We don't have to have monster homes. So that's just something, another idea for people if they're looking for a topic.
Okay, and I would just like to add to and build on what Nancy said, which is excellent, is that we are not disputing the market lens that has been presented to us or the population growth project targets, even though we know they're blatantly wrong. And that actually the Auditor General has agreed to look into the projections. We also, as Nancy pointed out, this isn't a tall tower versus single family home dilemma. There's been plans in place for a decade or more for some density along traditional routes, whatever option we choose. So we don't want anyone to go away with a mistaken idea that if they choose option 1, there will never be density. Of course there will be with both options. But as Nancy points out, it's not what we're going to build, it's where we're going to do it. So some of our mapping group, we've had tons of people involved in mapping, have found all kinds of empty lots that we can build, most especially those singles and semis. And the minute you build a semi-detached, you've doubled the housing on that lot. So that is the piece that the Ford government's land use changes that happened in August 2020 were really pushing out into farmland, not just in Hamilton, but around the greater Golden Horseshoe. So with that, I'd like to turn back to Nancy, and she's going to take us to the next section. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. Okay, so I'm just going to go through this sort of paperwork, online paperwork of how to get yourself set up to do a delegation. So there are three ways to delegate to City Hall. The first being a written submission, which is a letter. And if you do send your letter to the email that you see here, clerk@hamilton.ca, and you mention that you would like to have it appended to the agenda, then your letter will actually go down in the public record and be recorded there for perpetuity. And it's a nice thing to see your name and your letter there. And there's already, oh gosh, there's probably about 70 or 100 letters there already. So that's a nice way to get your voice heard. The two that we're going to concern ourselves with tonight are oral submissions and pre-recorded. So an oral submission means normally you would go into City Hall and wait your turn and then stand at the podium, but during COVID times, we're doing all that via WebEx. So it's much easier. You can sit on your sofa and wait for your turn to be called. It's like a big old Zoom call. So oral submissions, we're going to talk about, and pre-recorded. And with the oral, you do need to, for both of them, you have to pre-register. There are differing, the date for both of those is noon, Friday, November 5th. So if you've decided that you're going to delegate by either recording yourself ahead of time or doing it live on the day, you need to decide by noon on Friday and submit your request to do so. The only other option with a pre-recorded video is that you can also drop it off at the little black mailbox at the back of City Hall. That's the city's drop box. And if you just address it to the legislative coordinator of the GIC committee, that's General Issues Committee, then that's another way to get your pre-recorded delegation in. So Linda has mentioned that there will be an action sheet sent to you, and it does have a link to this form on the city's website. It's called a request to speak to Committee of Council. So this is your request, whether you're doing a pre-recorded or a live delegation via WebEx, you still need to fill out this form. So once you've opened up that link and you're on this page, the first thing you're going to see is at the bottom here where it says committee. It's a drop down. So you've got to hit the little arrow, drop down the menu, and find the General Issues Committee, because that's the committee that you're going to be delegating to. So switch the drop down to General Issues Committee. Then a little further down the page, you'll put in your name and address and a few details about yourself. And then you come to this big blank box, and that's where you're going to write down or type in what it is that you want to do. So you're going to say, I would like to speak at the November 9th, 2021 GIC meeting about the urban boundary expansion. And now if you're going to do an oral delegation, that's all you need to say. If you want to pre-record your delegation, instead you're going to print in there, I've emailed you my video and please append it to the November 9th, 2021 GIC meeting about the urban boundary expansion. So, and one you're just saying, I'm going to speak live, and one says, I already sent you my video, so please attach it to the agenda and play my video instead of me doing it live. So yeah, will you be requesting funds from the city? You'll put no. And are you going to submit a formal presentation? If you want to show a slide deck, then you can put yes in that spot. Now, if you're a first-time delegator, you may want to just do what I'm doing, which is sit facing the screen and tell your story. It's a little bit, if you will feel a bit nervous, but actually I think it's better than actually being in City Hall in person. Just looking at your computer screen is a bit easier actually. Plus you can have your cup of coffee right there. So you're also welcome to make a slide deck if you like. The first time I delegated, I did make a slide deck, and you can share your screen just as I'm doing right now. And they are very helpful, and it actually went through okay. So if you do want to make a slide deck, even just to show 1 or 2 pictures, then click yes in that spot, because you will be needing to send it to them ahead of time. Oh, that's the other thing. Even if you're doing a live delegation, if you're doing a slide deck, you do have to email it to them ahead of time. So convert it to a PDF, email it to clerk@hamilton.ca, because they're going to want to look at your slide deck first and make sure it's above board. So once you have submitted your request, you will receive an email to say, thank you. Yeah, we received your request. And it's worth going on to the actual agenda. If you've never done it, I'd always just Google City of Hamilton meetings and agendas, and it brings you to a calendar. And then you can hit November 9th, GIC committee on the calendar, and it'll bring you right to this agenda. And you'll know you're in the right place when you see this image here. It's a very long document, thousands of pages, and it's worth going through just to see if your name actually made it on there. For instance, I sent in that form 3 weeks ago, and my name wasn't showing on it. I'm pretty sure I was like the number 2 person to ask to delegate, but I'm still not on the list. So I emailed the clerk and she said, oops, sorry. So I'm so glad I checked. It's worth checking. Okay, so as I mentioned, you will receive an email from the City Hall just to say, okay, thanks, we received your request. And then shortly thereafter, you'll get a second email, which will be like, it looks like a Zoom invitation meeting. It's a WebEx one, and you just click yes to let them know you're RSVPing, and they'll tell you you can't share that link with anyone else because it is personal to you. Okay, now if you want to record your delegation because you can't be there on the day, or for whatever reason you would like to record it ahead of time and just send it in, it's easy to do. You just need to email them an MP4 of your delegation. So you can do that on your phone perhaps and convert it. But the easy way that I've done it in the past is just to use a Zoom meeting. It's a Zoom meeting with just you and yourself. And it's easy to get a Zoom account. Just sign up for free, as it says here. Just fill in a couple of details and you'll be in. And once you've signed up, this is your personal page. And just down here, sort of in the bottom middle, it says my meeting. And I find if I hover my mouse over that, then this blue start button appears. And once you hit start, then you're going to be in a Zoom meeting by yourself, and you're just going to record it. And the beauty of that is that you can do as many recordings as you want until you get it just right. So once you hit start, you're going to click the part at the top there where it says enlarge the Zoom, or sorry, click to open the Zoom meetings. Then you want to enlarge your screen. Check at the bottom left to see if your video is enabled or disabled, and then enable it. And once you're ready to go, then hit record at the bottom, and you'll hear that disembodied voice that we just heard a moment ago saying recording in progress. So you'll want to keep it to, as Michelle mentioned earlier, maximum of 5 minutes, because people have been cut off in the past, especially on a day like November 9th. There's going to be a lot of people and they're really going to be tight. So it might be a good idea to even make it less than 5 minutes. It does, you can probably say what you want within, 3-4 minutes, and then you won't have anybody sort of tapping their toes and waiting for you to get off. Okay, once you've finished recording, then you're going to want to push the square button at the bottom saying stop recording. And then the disembodied voice will appear again and tell you that you've stopped. Then you want to hit end. And then it's important to click end meeting for all, because that's what's going to convert your recording to an MP4. So it'll tell you converting. The little bar will move across, and then it'll say, where do you want to save this? And I usually save it to documents because that's always worked for me. And that's where I'm always able to find it really easily. So then once you've done that, you can just get out of your Zoom and head over to your documents, surf around for a bit until you see right here, it'll say Zoom, double click on it, and inside there will be audio, playback, and Zoom. Now that's on a Windows. On a Mac, it's a little different wording, but there are still 3 of them there. And one of those is going to be your video. So if you double click on it, then you'll notice that it's all playing and you're good. You're happy with it. You don't want to do it again. And that's the one that you want to send in. Then just, it's going to be called Zoom_0 or some such like that. So just rename it. And you can say Nancy Hurst, November 9th, GIC meeting, boundary expansion. Just something so that the clerk knows what that is and where it needs to be attached. And then you email it to the clerk, and in the body of your email, you can just say, this is a pre-recorded delegation. Can you please add it to the delegation list for the November 9th GIC meeting? And then she can cross-reference with the request to speak form that you already filled out and your video. They're both sort of cross-referencing with your name, the date, and what it is that you would like to do with your recording.
Nancy, there's a couple questions that pertain to what you're saying right now. Can I ask them of you? Lori is asking, will they accept audio only, or do we have to include video? And then I've got one more for you.
They will accept audio only, like you can leave your screen off. That would be fine. Yeah, you don't have to have the video. And there's also a phone option I didn't mention. If you send your request to speak to council in and you say, I would like to speak over the phone, then they'll send you the phone number and give you instructions on how to do that.
So that would be a landline as well, Nancy?
A landline, yeah, a landline or a cell phone, yeah.
Okay. And Janica asks, can we upload it to Google Drive?
Well, no, they want an MP4 to my knowledge. Linda, do you have any more information on that? But I'm pretty sure they want their own separate file that they can do something with.
Yeah, I think you could, because sometimes what happens is if a file is larger and you're trying to email it with a Gmail account, your email system will say to you, oh, that file's too big, and it'll automatically put it there and create a link that you can share. So I believe that would be okay, because the clerk could then download the MP4, the video file.
Oh, okay. So
that-
then they
that
would
may
download it
happen.
on their end.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry to interrupt, Nancy, and thank you to Lori and Janica for those questions.
Yeah, good questions. Okay, so now I'm going to pass it over to Linda. And if anybody has more questions about those bits, feel free to ask at the end, and we'll stay on a little bit longer. We want to be respectful of people's times, but we're not in a big rush. We're waiting till November 9th, so we've got lots of time. So if you want to ask questions in the end, you're welcome to stay on later. And over to Linda.
Thanks, Nancy and Michelle, for all of the great information. So I'm just going to do a quick recap of what you've heard already, just some of what you've heard, just to say again that the General Issues Committee meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, November 9th, starts at 9:30 in the morning. And as Nancy already told you, there are deadlines around when you have to get yourself registered if you're interested in making your voice heard. And again, we'll share all of that in the action sheet that we send out to all of you. Just wanted to quickly share as well that you can watch the General Issues Committee meeting and delegations in a number of ways. And this is important to know even if you are delegating, because you wait and wait and wait, you do your delegation, and once you're done, they ask you to exit the WebEx. So you'll want to know where you can jump in to keep on watching others do their delegations and to be able to hear the council conversation. So you have a couple of options. If you've never done this before, you can go to the City of Hamilton's website, www.hamilton.ca, and you'll see right from that webpage, sort of up in the upper right-hand corner, there's an icon that says live stream, just left of the search box. And you click on that and it'll take you through to where you could either look at the calendar Nancy described or the list of meetings and agendas. And you click on the meeting you're interested in, and you'll see the option to view the video there. You can also go to the City of Hamilton's YouTube channel, and the main committee meetings like this one, they do live stream on their YouTube channel as well. And then stay tuned. You'll get an email from us closer to the date. We will be setting up a watch party, and that's just setting up a Zoom where people can come together We'll be streaming the live stream, but it's a chance to, usually it's, you can chat with people in the chat, and it's kind of fun because if you're a delegator and people will watch you delegate, you can join the watch party and people will, say, way to go when you're done. And it's a nice sort of, it's our best attempt at creating some solidarity and togetherness in the virtual realm that we're functioning in these days. So stay tuned for that as well. We'll be sure to get those details out. Nancy, did you want to add anything? I see your hand up.
Yes, I'm so glad you reminded me and us of all those, the green room and the watch party. They're fun because when you're sort of disembodied all by yourself, you don't feel like maybe you're part of anything. But when you're in the other Zoom, you feel like you're part of it all. But I just wanted also to mention, as you touched on, Linda, the city of Hamilton has its own website, its own YouTube channel where all of these meetings are recorded for you to watch later. And they also show the live meetings. So as many people as we can get watching that YouTube channel on the day, it's a good thing because that's something visible that council, staff, everybody can see how many participants or how many are viewing at this moment. And the higher that number, and it's just maybe a good thing for them to know that a lot of people are paying attention. So even if you're watching it yourself, part of the WebEx, you can have it running on your phone separately on the side. So it's just a good idea to get as many people as possible watching and running that YouTube channel.
Thanks for that, Nancy. And next slide. And we also just wanted to share some resources. And again, these details will be in the action sheet. If you haven't yet, make sure that you're signed up to be part of Stop Sprawl Hamont. They're really keeping everyone in the loop on all of the key stuff that's unfolding on this issue. And you can sign up for their e-news at www.ssho.ca. And of course, I have to say to you, if you're not an Environment Hamilton member, be sure to join. Our membership is free. And we also have a petition that's been up for a while, calling on council to freeze the urban boundary to keep it firm. And again, we'll share a link to that petition in the action sheet that will be sent out. Be sure to follow Stop Sprawl Hamont on Facebook and Instagram. And another great way, if you're a Twitter user, look for GASP and Environment Hamilton. Between the two of us, we're doing a whole lot of work trying to keep the issue covered in Hamilton and beyond. GASP is sharing great stuff from around the Greater Golden Horseshoe. And on that note as well, through environmental defense, there's a campaign called Yours to Protect that's bringing together a lot of groups in municipalities across the Greater Golden Horseshoe. And at yourstoprotect.ca, you can find lots of really important information. Sadly, we're not alone in our battle in Hamilton. And there is a newsletter that you can sign up for as well that'll keep you in the loop on what's happening right across the Greater Golden Horseshoe. And then as well, if you've missed our past webinars, you can check those out on our website. And again, we'll share the links in the action sheet if you want to go back and watch some of what we've already presented out there in the community in feels like it's been years, but it was just a few months back, all within 2021 that this has all been happening. Next slide, Nancy. I'm not sure what's next after this. I think it's Michelle. Yep.
Great. Thank you, Linda and Nancy. So we're very lucky to have amongst us today, Olivia from the Acorn Tenant Union, who in fact really helped Nancy and I as beginners get started on our delegation path. And we have a 15 days of action happening right now. And today obviously is this event. And tomorrow we have one starting at 1 p.m. And it is the Stop Sprawl Phone Blitz with the Acorn Tenant Union. Now, if you look at tomorrow morning, we'll be sending you bright and early a registration. We also sent it on our MailChimp on Sunday as well. And what it is a registration that will take you to a Zoom link for 1 p.m. And I'm wondering if Olivia, if you don't mind unmuting yourself, maybe you can welcome folks to that event. Oh, Olivia might have stepped away, but she was on our event earlier. But anyway, oh, are you there, Olivia? Nope. Okay, well, we know that we have over 25 people registered. We'd like to have more. In talking to counselors, we've been informed that a phone blitz is a really powerful tool because of course we know that counselors have their inboxes flooded with letters, and that's important. But a phone call to a counselor and to the premier and others can be very powerful. And Olivia's going to provide you with a script of what you can say. And as Nancy's pointed out, because we've done these before for other causes, that you don't always talk to the politician themselves. Sometimes you leave a voicemail or you speak to an assistant, but it's a very powerful way to, in this final push, we have just more than a week left to really get our message across and keep the pressure up. So thank you to the Acorn Tenant Union for that. I just want to say one more thing. Some of you may have received a Hamilton Needs Housing brochure in your mailbox. This is a group of developers posing as a grassroots organization. To my knowledge, they have not reached out to Acorn Tenant Union or other advocacy groups in Hamilton to help with these issues. Whereas we are partnering hand in hand with these organizations to really look at the affordability issue within our urban boundaries. So we did a really interesting campaign called Sharpie Shenanigans. If you get onto Twitter or Facebook and just put in Sharpie Shenanigans hashtag, you'll see what that's all about. And so I really want to thank Acorn for this event tomorrow. And over to you, Nancy.
Okay, I think we're going to our final slide, and that's it. We're offering our thanks to you folks for coming tonight and for sharing your interest. And I'll just open the floor up to any questions or comments or discussions. And I'll just stop sharing my screen at this point. And if anybody has anything they'd like to share or offer or questions, please go ahead and do that. I wanted to also just add another reason to do a phone blitz or even just to phone your counselor is to combat what we have heard a little bit of fear mongering among certain counselors in Ancaster who are worried that some of the letters are coming from maybe bots or you know, just questioning the validity of the letters, but you really can't question a phone call from a real person. So it's really welcome to do it. And I've done it myself, and I almost always end up speaking to a really lovely person who just wants to take down my message. So that's, don't be afraid to do it. It's a great, it's a great thing to do.
I think that's a great point, Nancy, just to help counselors to realize that there are real life people out there in the community who care about these things. And so I would add to that, if you've never picked up the phone or emailed your counselor, email might be better right now, just, you know, with the pandemic, they're not necessarily sitting in an office, but now is the time to give it a try and to let them know who you are and why you care about this issue. You know, in addition to taking the time to delegate, you may even want to share with them the key points that you're going to raise in your delegation even before the meeting, so that they know that you're coming and they have time to reflect on the concerns that you're going to raise when you delegate on November 9th. It's a really, and I think it's how all of us get more engaged in issues is, you know, taking that step of engaging in the civic process in this way. I always say to people, there's no turning back once you've started to do that and you see how collectively our voices can make a difference. But also when you see how when those voices aren't there, the decisions aren't always necessarily made in the best interest of community. So this is a really important right that we all have as residents that we need to make good use of.
I see that Laura Katz has her hand up. Laura, do you want to comment?
Yes, I just have a question about, I have a bunch of notes written down now that are all quite random, and I'm wondering if you have any advice about how to narrow down the actual topic to delegate on. So for example, I have what I had written in the chat earlier about climate change and needing to make sure that we preserve all the land just in case maybe it's not usable now for farming, but maybe later it will be, or will be needed. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about was the fact that people love going on vacation and they glamorize their vacations because of these walkable cities and being able to have dinner down the street from their hotel and walkable communities, and why not make that here? And the last thing I wanted to say was from this excellent podcast I listened to. They said it's never going to be easier than now, a time when people like really do want to live sustainably and they're trying their best despite the like the regulations that the city has in place for us, or that corporations dictate how we live basically, and we're just trying our best within those regulations. But basically trying to convince council like it's never going to be an easier time to vote for this firm urban boundary. 92% of the city wants it. So anyways, I just am having a hard time narrowing down what I want to say exactly, if you had any advice.
I feel for you. It's hard to narrow it down. And I think you can probably fit in 2 or 3 subjects in there because you know, you'll have your 4 or 5 minutes, and what you said right there is very telling. It doesn't have to be a, you know, a university essay. It's okay to make, I think, 2 or 3 points. So I guess I would maybe not talk about 7 different things, but maybe choose the top 2, 3. That would be my advice to you, Laura.
Thank you. Oh, and my last question was because of, I forget which counselor it was. I think it was Lloyd Ferguson that talked about that people are bots, and if you think it would be valuable to just go on and introduce myself and say, by the way, I'm not a robot, but I do use automated petitions like the rest of the world, but I'm a real person. Or if you think that's unnecessary.
That's funny. Well, I'll just say, sorry, Michelle, I'll just say that apparently, well, somebody got in contact with me recently, and it was Maria Pearson. She called one of her constituents that she saw had sent one of those letters, and she called her to say, did you really send this letter? Because we think that it's, that the emails have been hacked, and and it's some nefarious, I don't know, body that's been sending these emails because they've been stolen. So I don't know. I think it's just the older counselors who don't quite understand technology, maybe.
I would suggest, Laura, that you, if you could participate in our phone blitz tomorrow and have the opportunity to communicate that to either Councillor Ferguson or his staff. I think, you know, what we've heard is that if we go into this meeting being really positive, we can keep that momentum strong. And I think that was a lot of feedback we received from councillors on March 29th was we weren't coming in attacking individual councillors. And I do think that we know that the every single submission was vetted by Steve Robichaud, who's the head of planning. In fact, although the survey closed on July 29th, it wasn't till mid-September that they gave their totals because they vetted every single response. So I think that communication one-to-one with councillors would be probably really beneficial, and then building our positive momentum in the chambers of the council. That's just my take on it. I see Rita has her hand up. Rita, do you want to make a comment or question? And then Deborah.
Yes, thanks. Just a point of clarification. So we want to have we want to express our interest in delegating or submitting the pre-recorded delegation by November 5th.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have to have the recording itself in by that date? So expression of interest and the submission at the same time.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Good question, Rita. Deborah?
Hi, I'm Deborah Boyd. Hi, I've been paying attention to Stop the Sprawl, but have not been engaged directly yet. And my passion is about building the capacity within the city boundary for various types of accommodation. To me, I see it just as an absolute win-win with an aging population and the ability to build in a granny suite, for example. Economically, it's so much better. It really supports the age in place. And having done the process myself through the city, I know that there is no logic to the space when they apply the bylaws of construction. A 500 square foot space needs the same, I guess, diligence as a high-rise condo. And so the costs are exorbitant to the point of the ridiculous. So I can understand why people don't go that route through the city. I think it would be interesting to know, because we talk about, people wanting to do this. Is there an interest in doing that? Is there an interest in using bottom floor, top floor, increasing density in residential areas? And what percentage of the problem would that address? And what are the costs and barriers for people to do that? In one, I own a couple of properties in Dundas, and in one instance, the neighbors, of course, were advised that I was putting in a secondary residence in a home already zoned R2. I went to the Committee of Adjustments, and 5 neighbors showed up with a petition with 76 signatures opposed. And it's like, we can't talk out both sides of our mouths. We need housing to support students. They support the economy, and yet we can't give them affordable housing. So I'm not sure how to distill what I'm saying into something that sort of, makes a concise point. But if I was to delegate, it would probably be something based on my own experience in terms of that. Who is interested in putting in a secondary residence? What are the barriers that don't allow them to do that, or inform their decision not to? And how can we relieve some of those barriers? Go ahead.
Yeah, I can start, Deborah. Those are all great questions and really important questions to be asking right now, because I agree with you. We're pushing in a new direction, which we all feel strongly is the right direction, but we need more tools in the planning toolkit to make those options work better than they do. And I think the good thing is we can look to other jurisdictions around us where they're further ahead in figuring this out. And one that I've been looking at recently, and I know others in the network have as well, is the city of Portland. And I know people often say, oh, you're always hearing about Portland and what's happening there, but they've done some incredible work really starting to figure out exactly what you're talking about. How do we start to get a grip on particularly the middle density stuff and making it easier, almost as of right, a way to move forward. And I noticed somebody commented in the chat earlier about tiny houses or cottages. They've even thought about that sort of thing within the context of how they've changed their rules. So we've got a lot to learn, but it says to me there's a whole lot of potential with changing the rules, bringing in better rules to get us much further along in being able to accommodate more people within the urban boundary. So in Hamilton, we do now have a second dwelling unit policy. The city is pursuing, they call it the residential zones project, and they've only completed phase 1, which is the second dwelling unit phase. So now, in a neighborhood anywhere in the urban part of the city, you could build a garden suite, a laneway suite, a second dwelling unit within the existing home. And they've made that process easier But we know that for the other options, the sort of middle density and the higher density, there's still more work to be done on the residential zones to facilitate those things happening too. And, there was an example recently, I think it's called the Cumberland Terrace. And it was our Director of Economic Development and Planning, Jason Thorne, who shared this being a really great example, good thing in terms of infill. And I think it's 4 or 5 units within this redevelopment within a residential area. And then there was a whole lot of dialogue underneath, including from developers who talked about exactly what you're describing. The permitting fees, the process you had to go through, raising a lot of concerns about the need to facilitate these desirable to development and redevelopment. So those pieces of the residential zone review, and we're kind of getting into the weeds of policy here, but they're coming, and those are pieces that we all need to be watching. And as dry as it might sound, it's really important for community to understand and weigh in and push for progressive policies to come out of those pieces, because those are going to be the critical tools that we need to do what we're all talking about here. And they're just about to happen. So I'm glad that you've raised that. I think those are really important points that you've made. And what you may want to do when you delegate is start to point to other jurisdictions where they've really, I don't want to say paved the way, not within the context of what we're talking about. They've made it easier, right? They've made it much more straightforward for people to do these positive things. And we need to be demanding that in Hamilton too. I'm happy to share. Maybe we can throw it into the chat, or I can email you. I think I've got your email, Deborah. Send you the links to the Portland stuff. It's and I think we've all recently, EH and Stop Sprawl Hammond have been sharing information about Portland within the last couple of weeks. So you'll find some of that information there too.
Yeah, and we've put in the chat both the TIE article, and then Doreen Nickel, who's a local writer, did one today that just dropped at noon, talking about our Stop Sprawl Hamilton issue, connecting it to food security, soils, and bringing in the shenanigans. She does kind of an overview of the whole issue, which is nice because often in mainstream media outlets, there's a limit of 250 words or 700 words, and Doreen's got a bit of a lengthy piece there. And I hope everybody shares articles when we find them. Apparently editors really appreciate when they see things being shared often online. They decide to send the reporters out to do more stories. I love the point by Heidi about how do we get the National Observer to talk about what's happening here. And they've got fantastic writers. We've been in touch with some of them. And I think we're hoping to see more and more writing around these issues. I noticed Ann Washington had her hand up, but I don't, oh, there she is. Ann, would you like to speak?
Organized here. Yeah, my question was going to be, with the intensification, right? It was known that somebody was talking about intensification in the city to a councillor, and this person said, and what about green space? And the councillor's response was, you can't have both. So this is something I'm always asking about, Nancy. What are the requirements of a developer to architecturally design their buildings to accommodate some sort of green space? That's the first part. The other part that's just going across my mind is recognizing in Westdale particularly the amount of multiple dwellings there are, either legally or illegally. Parking is a real problem. So there are two of the areas, green space and additional parking. Now I know that we want to all have, public transportation, but they're very real questions that people who aren't on our side, so to speak, are things that they raise. So how does one respond to that? You gonna try it, Nancy?
Well, I mean, Linda might be able to help me out here, but I remember asking the question of city staff when they were talking about their wonderful plans of expanding into Alfreda. And I asked, well, what regulations would be in place to build those structures to green standards? And I'm thinking it's kind of similar to your question, what regulations are in place to include green spaces? But I wanted to know how they would be built environmentally friendly. And the answer from the city staffer was, it's up to them to build it how they want. So I don't know, Linda, are there more robust protections in place for our green space within our city?
Yeah, so here are a couple of comments on that front. One challenge we have right now, and this is something we've been pushing, actually a number of local orgs have been pushing for a while, is the need for better stormwater management. Of course, we all know what happens to Shadow Creek and Red Hill Creek when we have heavy rainfall and the combined sewer tanks overflow, discharge into our waterways and bring sanitary waste and other challenges. So we need better ways even now for managing our urban areas. And so what we need to see more of is what we call green infrastructure. So bioswales are a really interesting way that you can retrofit existing parking lots and even boulevards on streets to hold back flows, but do it in a way that's green, right? So that you're bringing more trees and more native plants into the urban area. The urban forest itself, we're on the brink of the city approving its first ever urban forest strategy. We need to push for a really ambitious canopy cover target, and that's going to really help to motivate the city to plant more trees in public spaces so that as we intensify, there's more attention being paid to streetscapes and creating those streetscapes with greener infrastructure that's going to support trees and other green. You know, some cities like Toronto, they incentivize green roofs. So there's another way to introduce more green into the city, and that can provide really interesting habitat and help to maintain biodiversity. There are lots of really creative ideas. In some municipalities, they've got the power to mandate certain things. That would hold true for us in Hamilton to a certain degree. When you get into the more creative, sort of pushing the envelope kinds of changes, municipalities, the progressive ones, are incentivizing those changes. Hamilton doesn't really have a formalized green standard or green development standard. And a number of us have been pushing for that to happen as well, where we would see that mix of, okay, public, just so you're aware, here are all the things that we can require, particularly private developers to pay attention to. And here are ways that we could incentivize additional action. So we continue to push to see the city do that. And I think this is going to be really important as we move forward with intensification, because Anne, I agree with you, we've got issues now with too much concrete and hard surfaces within our urban area, including more and more parking pads, right? As people are putting more units into existing homes. So we need to figure out better ways forward. I'm going to talk about Portland again very quickly, because what they've done there is they've eased up on some of the parking requirements. And this can be really controversial because right away people say, oh, there are going to be cars everywhere. But if you're doing it in locations where you've got really great public transit and higher order transit like LRT, then you're starting to create urban neighborhoods where people can more readily make the choice not to have a car. And that's really what we want to get to. So I want to compare where we're at in Hamilton to what you see in a lot of Toronto neighborhoods where, I saw some of the stats recently. I'm blown away by how many Torontonians don't own cars. And so that's what starts to happen, as you figure out how to ramp up all of these other services, make those neighborhoods better served by public transit and more walking, biking friendly. That's going to really facilitate the shift. But the interesting thing about that is getting more people, bumping up the population levels in neighborhoods is what really helps to support you getting there, particularly with the transit piece and making it a viable option to boost up service. So lots more work to be done. But again, on that one, I would argue we need to be pushing for good policies, and we can all make our voices heard on that too.
Because with the intensification, the pressures on existing parks, such as Bayfront Park, Churchill Park, and some of the small areas, is going to be dramatic. And I remember that when they built that big building on Aberdeen and Dundurn, and I phoned the city about that because it was almost right to the edge of the sidewalk. And the same builder was building the one on the condos on Lock Street. And they said, city planners said, oh, that won't happen again. Well, sure enough, if you look at that condo on Lock Street, it is right to the sidewalk. And there's no greenery around it. And they're the kind of things I keep thinking, you know, can't there be the regulation to build back so that at least they can put something in? But anyway, another thing to work on, Linda.
Yeah, no,
Thank you.
that's a good point too, Anne. And I'm going to throw one more thing out there that I think we all need to think about. And I hope there aren't any golfers on this call, but I can't help but think about neighborhoods like, you know, Kirkendall and the areas close to the Shadoke Golf Course. And then in the east end of the city, we've got the King's Forest Golf Course. And those are public golf courses. And I'm going to be really honest in saying to you that as the city intensifies, to me, those are properties that become far more useful as green spaces, you know, as parks for the broader public to enjoy. So let's start having that conversation. And again, I know down the highway in Toronto, those conversations are already very actively underway, where people are you know, doing some wonderful visioning around how else could we use these open spaces that we have, you know, often, you know, in the case of Shadoke and King's Forest, you know, arguably right plonk in the urban part of the city.
Not to mention that golf courses are so environmentally unfriendly, and water hogs and chemical hogs. And I think when you do the math, it works out to, you know, just a few golfers using acres and acres of land. Are there any other questions that anybody sees? Hands up or?
What a great evening, and thank you all for coming. I think this was an excellent event. And Linda, we'll work together on a take action sheet for everyone. And
yeah,
then,
absolutely. Between the three of us, we'll make sure that we get that out to all of you as soon as we can. And we'll include contact information so that if you want to reach out to any of us one-on-one, we're happy to do what we can to help, to support you in taking that step of doing a delegation.
and we've got these MailChimps coming out every day till November 9th with our days of action. So watch for those in your inbox. Nancy, do you want to close us out?
Sure. I'll just say thanks once again to everybody. And if you have any questions about submitting your request to speak, then have a look at the action sheet that's coming, and don't feel shy to reach out to any of us. We'd be very happy to help you to get you in front of a camera to say your piece. So thank you so much, everybody. And we appreciate you taking the time to be with us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for doing it.
Bye, everybody.
Good night.
Bye, everyone.
Nancy, it's Caroline.
Oh, hi, Caroline.
I wanted to tell you, I'm already on the agenda because I I decided to get on that early. But I wanted to let you know there's a Sean Robinson on the agenda, and I know him. He is a former engineer with the city of Hamilton, and I think he's going to be speaking. He's not speaking as a staff member because he's retired. But he and I have had many dealings over the years with regard to Sprawl. And I'm going to be saying his name in my, because I'm talking about my personal story. So I'm going to be saying his name. So it'll be interesting to see what he has to say in the delegation himself, because I get a sense he's going to be a little bit sympathetic to us, because now he's retired. He doesn't have to, you know, toe the line with the city anymore. And I think because of the dealings he's had with me and the Mount Hope area, he's very much feeling that, you know, the quality of community has really degraded because of Sprawl. So it'll be an interesting meeting. I just thought I'd let you know that.
Well, did you say his last name is Robinson or Robertson?
Yeah, Sean Robinson.
Sean Robinson. Okay, I'll look him up. Thank you for the heads up, Caroline.
Yeah, no worries, Nancy.
Thanks.
Yeah, okay, well, have a good night.
Thanks, you too. Take care.
Yeah, take care.
All right, I figured out how to use the remove participant